Hello and welcome to Podround, the brand new podcast bringing you the best of royal podcasting each week. And I'm going to start with Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. This is a great podcast covering different parts of the royal rota. And one of her segments pieces is called Heirs and Spares. And this she co-hosts with a chap called Rupert Bell, who's known as a commentator on TalkSport in the UK, but he's also sort of known for his proximity to the royal family, so to speak. So between Kinsey in LA and Rupert in the UK, they give a really good all-round discussion and debate around the royal family. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they disagree. It's a really nice pairing. So worth listening for that. But also her coverage is really good. And this segment, Heirs and Spares, focuses this week on the coverage of the royal family's appearance at St George's Chapel in Windsor for the Easter parade. Obviously, King Charles and Queen Camilla were there. And this time they were alongside Prince William and Princess Catherine, with Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, their children. And the debate in this episode of Heirs and Spares was around a number of issues with Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, them not appearing as predicted. And but the real star and the real sort of standout from this podcast was their focus on Harriet Spurling, who is set to marry Peter Phillips in June. Now, Peter Phillips is the son of Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips, and he was married to a lady called Autumn Kelly. They have now divorced, and now Harriet and Peter are going to be, I predict, the new love story of the royal family. But there was a lot of talk about that romance, and then they skipped over to a really interesting analysis of the comparison between the real royal family and the Montecito royals of Harry and Meghan, and their Easter Instagram service, as you could say. So there was that as well. And then it was quite interesting because Kinsey introduced some analysis from a chap called Scott Rouse, who was looking at how Meghan and Harry present the images of their children on Instagram and showing just the backs of their heads or the sides of their faces. And Scott Rouse said something very interesting, and I thought this was a great mark of Kinsey Schofield as well. This is why she's a really good podcast to listen to, because she picks up these tidbits all over the net. And the analysis from Scott Rouse was the fact that by doing this, you're almost flirting and teasing the viewer with these images of the children, which could actually have the opposite effect of trying to shelter them from being recognizable in their pictures on the internet. It actually could have the opposite effect in appealing to the more unsavory members of society who may find that a tease. They may find it something that would pique their interest more and maybe lead them to doing more dangerous things. So this was an interesting observation on Kinsey's podcast. They also talked a little bit about Harry's privacy, a speech about privacy, where he talked about his own privacy and then how that contrasted with the fact that he's actually exploiting his children on Instagram and not really taking into account their privacy. So this is a really good all-round podcast looking at the royal family in the round.
Hi there, everyone. Lyle here from Where Pop Culture Meets PR, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that we really enjoy making Podround for you. So if you are enjoying this episode and have enjoyed episodes in the past, then please do like, subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. It really does mean the world to the team here. And please do head to the Podround Substack. Subscribe, get your comments in and everything you've heard. We really, really appreciate those comments and love reading them. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of this episode.
Then we move on to another podcast, another one of my favourites, Wootton Outspoken. Now, I copped a bit of grief in the comments for highlighting Dan because he is so outspoken. He's quite a divisive character and a lot of people don't like his opinions. And I'm not saying I do, but I tell you what, it's a really, really fun podcast to watch. And this one was called Get Lost. Meghan Markle dumped by top Hollywood agent Ari Emanuel of WME for her diva antics. And Dan not only is a great source of gossip and intrigue and analysis, but he also brings on a very well-known commentator called Angela Levin. And between the two of them, they discuss a number of things. The first one was this dumping by WME. Now, for those of you who don't know, WME is a big American agency, looks after Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, actually. And the guy who heads it up is a guy called Ari Emanuel, and he is one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. Now, this story was reported in February 2025 by Page Six, and then that was denied by WME. But Dan talks about this article that was in the Daily Mail with the Daily Mail's Alison Boshoff reporting on the fact that actually they did come to a split around Thanksgiving last year, where apparently Meghan was being a bit of a diva about the fact she wanted more support around Thanksgiving, and Ari Emanuel believed that his people needed their holidays around Thanksgiving, and that led to a parting of the ways. Now, this isn't great for Meghan. As they analysed, they talked about how she's fallen out with a lot of powerful people in Hollywood. You remember the fact that the pictures got taken down after the Kris Jenner 70th birthday party. So there was a bit of a split, let's say, between her and the Kardashians, most powerful family in Hollywood. Then you've got Ted Sarandos, who is the CEO of Netflix, who was very much on their side and took a real punt on the As Ever brand of homewares and home consumables. And obviously they fell out with Spotify, where they were named as royal grifters. So Dan goes into quite a bit of detail and discussion about that. He also notes this Instagram representation of Princess Lilibet and Prince Archie on Easter. This Instagram presentation of Easter at the Montecito house is really coming in for quite a lot of criticism, not only because of the hypocrisy over privacy, but also because it just looks quite sad and a bit creepy. And Dan sort of goes into that. And then they talk about some really good gossip about Eileen Gu. And do go to Dan's podcast to see the pictures here of Harry looking happier than he's ever looked with Eileen Gu. And also some pictures with Katy Perry and Justin Trudeau, and no sign of Meghan. So this pointing to sort of an increasingly separate time of enjoyment for Harry and other people. And then finally, they round up on Patrick J. Adams being on the Not Skinny But Fat podcast, and a bit of in-depth on his commentary on Meghan and the fact that he didn't have enough followers to deserve a pot of jam from Meghan. And then Dan comments on how she responded. So go to Dan's podcast to see what Meghan did and what Dan made of that. Then we move on to another great independent podcaster called Taz. And she's got a podcast called According to Taz. And she, like me, comes from a PR background, and she picks up, she's so opinionated. She's such a great person to listen to. She appears on other podcasts of other creators, like the brilliant Shauna Kay from the Vintage Read podcast. And Taz, in this one, really, it's called Mr. Mischief, Snuggles and Secrets. This is a juicy, juicy podcast, and she's got many podcasts, so do go to her channel, According to Taz. And we obviously are listing all of these podcasts in the episode notes that accompany this YouTube video and this Substack video. But in this one, she's talking about Prince Harry's court case against the Daily Mail. Now, he's within a group of people who are taking the Daily Mail to court. And these are famous people, including Elton John, Sadie Frost, Liz Hurley. In this one, Taz talks about how Harry's barrister, David Sherborne, got into a bit of bother with the judge, saying that the Daily Mail had to prove that they got the stories that they got not through illicit sources, and they had to prove their sources. And the judge actually said, well, no, the burden of proof is on you. You have to prove to us that the journalists that got their stories from illicit sources. And then Taz talks about how the journalists from the Daily Mail were trotted out onto the witness box. Katie Nicholl showed that she had actually been invited into Harry's social circle. Rebecca English gave great examples of, again, a leaky social circle of Harry's. And finally, Charlotte Griffiths. Now, she was the one that made the headlines. She was really used to be nicknamed Charlotte Scobie after Omid Scobie, and because she used to be so pro Harry and Meghan. But she's obviously having to defend her own reputation. And she showed literal evidence of Facebook texts, which are shown on Taz's podcast. And you can stop the podcast and you can read all the texts on Taz's podcast. So do go over to Taz's podcast and have a look at those texts. And they are very spicy and flirty texts. So it's worth a look at those. And it really is a massive own goal to Harry, who claimed that he only had met Charlotte Griffiths for maybe a night, and that he didn't know her, they weren't personal friends. And it blows that testimony out of the water and really shows a much closer relationship. So do go and have a look at According to Taz. And she's got many other podcasts on her YouTube channel. Then the final one we're going to look at today is a podcast that was actually highlighted to me by one of you guys, one of the people commenting on our Substack. So keep those comments coming. Keep the comments coming on YouTube and on Substack.
Hi there, everyone. Lyle here again from Where Pop Culture Meets PR. We hope you're enjoying this latest episode of Podround, but I would just like to take this opportunity to tell you about Where Pop Culture Meets PR, which is an unfiltered journey into the world of modern communications where nothing is off the record. From celebrity crises to brand blunders, media spin and viral moments, we take a sharp look at reputation, media, and the stories shaping public life. Drawing on decades of PR and media experience, we go beyond the headlines and break it all down with a healthy dose of insight, humour, and a little bit of chaos. Join us to decode the power of public relations and why it's so much more than spin. That's Where Pop Culture Meets PR, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of this episode.
This is a podcast called Royal Rogering. As the name suggests, it's not a particularly pro-royal podcast, unlike Kinsey, Schofield, who generally loves the royal family. But Royal Rogering it doesn't have anybody heading it. There is no lead like Taz or like Dan or like Kinsey or Rupert. This is like a little documentary series. It's a filmed one with a narration and voiceover. And they have this Meghan Markle documentary. And I looked at 2 episodes of this documentary. And the first episode looked at the time when Meghan was in South Africa on a royal tour at the time when they'd taken young Archie with them on the tour, and they were, getting a lot of really positive feedback on that tour. And they'd taken a well-known ITV journalist, a UK journalist called Tom Bradby, and he asked her what has now become an iconic question, which was, "Are you okay?" And she answered, saying, "Thank you for asking. Not many people ask me that." And that became something that became talked about a lot. And she ended up making a bit of a campaign out of it. And she wrote an article, I think it was in the New York Times, but I'll have to fact check that, and we'll link that at the bottom of this podcast. She wrote an article about it and how people should be asked, "Are you okay?" And this goes on for the first half of the podcast and films that royal tour and the "Are you okay?" and then her sort of little campaign about "Are you okay?" And then it jumps sequentially into a whole new "Are you okay?" campaign that was started by a chap called Gavin Larkin, who lost his father to suicide. And he felt that if somebody had just asked his father, "Are you okay?" that things might have turned out a bit differently for him, and he might have not killed himself in the end. And this was a really, really sad documentary because Gavin Larkin actually contracted bone cancer during this campaign and unfortunately passed away from that. And indeed, his son also had an inoperable brain tumour. And this is shown. The irony of all of this is that this was a massive campaign in Australia. And the implication from this documentary series, the Meghan Markle documentary, is that Meghan had picked up on this "Are You OK?" campaign from Australia and hadn't really referenced that in her "Are You OK?" campaign. Do note that Gavin Larkin came from Coogee Beach. Now, this was a real coincidence. Meghan will be doing a mindfulness weekend at the Intercontinental in Coogee Beach next month. The irony isn't lost on me. Anyway, the next part of this documentary that I looked at was an episode that really compared and contrasted Meghan with Princess Catherine and highlighted numerous instances of mimicry of Meghan almost being obsessed. It alludes to this in this documentary. This isn't something that I'm saying. This is what this documentary series alludes to, is Meghan's near obsession with Princess Catherine, and how whenever Catherine does something, Meghan either copies it or tries to upend it. So, for example, they start off this comparison from before Meghan was even part of the royal family, where she was actually getting married to her first husband, Trevor Engel, and she copied the belt from Princess Catherine's evening wedding dress with her wedding dress when she got married to Trevor Engel. And this documentary shows the actual pictures, the comparative pictures. It goes into great detail about things like Princess Catherine first highlighting the children's book, The Bench, which then Meghan Markle goes on to highlight. The fact that Princess Catherine was discussing edible flowers with Mary Berry, and then suddenly they appear on Meghan's homemaking series on Netflix. Catherine announced a rose that was named after her, which tied in with a cancer charity. Some of the profits from the sale of that rose went to this cancer charity. And almost immediately, Meghan is shown rose cutting in her garden on Instagram. And then there's things like Catherine's story about making chutney for the Queen, because she couldn't think of a Christmas present that the Queen of England wouldn't have. So she thought, well, I'll make my grandmother's recipe of chutney and give that to the Queen. And apparently that went down very well for one Christmas present. And then we see Meghan Markle talking about her grandmother and her grandmother's apple butter recipe and how she used to look after her grandmother. And then they cut in with some shots of Meghan Markle's stepsister saying she never looked after the grandmother. So it's a really incisive, detailed documentary of all of these examples of mimicry, going all the way through to literally children losing their front teeth, Louis losing his front teeth, and that's documented by Princess Catherine on social media. And then all of a sudden, Meghan's talking about how Prince Archie has lost a tooth. Those are the 4 podcasts that we've taken a little of an in-depth look at to sample for you, to show some really good and different types of royal reportage that is out there right now. So thank you for listening to Podround. We are first and foremost pod fans, and we love all things podcasts. We're going to be doing this in many genres, but to start with, we're concentrating on royals and royal podcasts, and we'll be taking deep dives into other podcasts in different subjects down the line. You can find us at Substack, at Podround, or on YouTube on Podround, or any one of your places that you listen to podcasts, whether that be Spotify or Apple. Do find us and drop us a comment wherever you may be listening and watching us, and give us suggestions like the Royal Rogering one. That was great. So I'll see you next time.